on a gurney with heart palpitations and a paper bracelet around my wrist. I tapped a photo my daughter-in-law had posted my son at the head of my dining table, my chair filled by her glittering smile, my granddaughter laughing at something just out of frame. The caption crowed. Finally, a day without the drama queen. In that instant, something steadier than rage clicked into place. If they could celebrate my absence, they could live with my decisions. I was 63, newly fragile, in a body that had faithfully carried me through grief and routine, but was evidently tired of pretending. The nurse asked if my son would pick me up. I looked at the timestamp on Melissa's post, about 20 minutes after the hospital had called him, and told the nurse I'd call a taxi. In the lobby, while monitors bleeped faintly down the hall, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I called my old real estate agent. "Barbara, it's Eleanor Hartwell. That little house on Maple Street you once swore would sell in a week. I'm ready." Her laugh was brisk and approving. She could do paperwork fast, she said, but even a rush would take time. Fine. For once, time would work for me. It had started with love, as these things often do. After my husband Tom died, the house felt like a museum built for echoes. My son David brought groceries, checked locks, told me no one should rattle around a 4-bedroom alone. He and Melissa proposed a temporary move. They'd keep the place running while I sorted out my future. Temporary turned into seasons and then years. My wallpaper disappeared under neutral paint, the dining chairs were swapped for a sleeker set, and I learned to knock on what had once been my own door. I rented a small apartment and paid for it, while they lived mortgage-free in the house Tom and I had spent decades paying off. They redirected my mail to help, and I was grateful. Or maybe I was just exhausted. Barbara arrived at my apartment the next morning with a steel-spined attorney named Patricia Morgan, who unpacked a briefcase like a field surgeon laying out tools. Before anyone touched a listing agreement, Patricia asked the questions that mattered. No, there was no lease. Yes, I had continued paying for the roof repair and the washing machine and every utility. Her mouth tightened at the word mail. She warned about tenant claims and the ugly possibilities of adverse possession, then asked when I had last checked my credit. I could not remember. She could, apparently. Within the hour, she had me enrolled in monitoring and had flagged suspicious inquiries. Barbara, who'd sold houses longer than most people had been alive, slid over a folder with tax records. There had been liens filed and released in the past 18 months, she said. Home improvement loans. My skin went cold. I had not authorized a thing. The phone began its chorus at 7:23 a.m. David's call went to voicemail. Melissa's came next, voice tight and contemptuous as piano wire. A listing agent had phoned, she said. There had to be a mistake. I told her there wasn't. The deed, I reminded them both when David's voice joined, on speaker remained in my name. Melissa said they had invested in the house. I reminded her I had paid for the paint she bragged about and the appliances she photographed. Then I mentioned the post from the hospital night, the drama queen caption she swore wasn't about me. Before she could shift the story, I asked about something more stubborn than a caption, the $75,000 in home equity pulled in my name 6 months earlier. The silence that followed tasted like metal. That afternoon, I collected evidence the way a diver gathers air. Patricia called with early findings, 3 credit cards opened in my name, with limits between $15,000 and $20,000, a personal loan of $30,000, store and gas cards, an account I had never seen, paying them all tied to the address on Maple Street and to David's phone. There were charges for a yoga studio, a personal trainer, private tennis lessons, dinners that cost more than my monthly groceries, and a December vacation to Mexico that apparently needed quiet time while I spent Christmas with a cheap scented candle and a polite text 2 days late. The most recent charge made while a nurse adjusted my IV was at a jewelry store for more than $3,000. I printed statements until dawn, each page another bead on the same rope of betrayal. It's strange what grief can disguise when you're determined to hold a family together. Absent calls become busy schedules. Missed birthdays become mix-ups. A staged photo reads as hope if you squint hard enough. But bills do not blink, and forged signatures don't soften in better light. Patricia named what the pattern looked like from a distance: financial elder abuse, a slow choreography toward guardianship. Their consultations with elder law attorneys, the redirected mail, the curated story of my confusion, every piece fit a plan designed to make me seem unwell so they could legally take control. Barbara's voice, when she heard the whole of it, went low and certain. We would list the house. Patricia would file criminal charges. And I, who had allowed myself to be made small inside my own life, would stop apologizing for taking up space. At noon the next day, a car idled outside my building. My granddaughter Chloe stood at my door with a suitcase and frightened, practiced tears. Her parents had sent her alone. She begged me not to make them homeless words much too heavy for a 12-year-old mouth. I made her tea and promised her a bed for as long as she needed one. When I walked her back down, David rolled his window to ask whether she had talked sense into me. I told him the only sense left was legal. Identity theft, I said. Credit fraud, forgery, $108,000 stolen across 18 months. Melissa called me dramatic again. I told her that family supports you in a hospital does not cheer when you're gone and never steals your name to buy new jewelry. I opened the back door and told Chloe to come upstairs. Her parents stared like people realizing the ocean has a tide. Patricia turned my small kitchen into a war room by 8 a.m., laying out manila folders as if they were coordinates on a map. Chloe sat at the table with a bowl of cereal, pretending not to listen while the adults spoke in careful, clipped sentences. The attorney's voice was calm as winter glass when she explained the next moves. Freeze the fraudulent accounts, place fraud alerts with the Bureau's file, a police report with the Elder Abuse Unit, and prepare for the inevitable counterattack. They will try to control the narrative, she said, tapping a page that showed inquiries from elder law firms. They've been rehearsing the role of your saviors for months. We do not argue with their script. We replace it with the truth. Barbara arrived minutes later with a thermos of coffee and the kind of smile you put on before a necessary storm. She had already scheduled a discreet pre-listing walkthrough for the following morning and arranged a locksmith for the moment the paperwork allowed entry. Clean, quiet, clinical, she said. You will not throw them out. The facts will. By 10:30 a.m., we were at the precinct with Detective Rodriguez, a woman whose questions slid under surfaces and pried them up. She listened without interrupting, took my folder of statements, and asked about that Mexico trip. I told her about the lonely Christmas and the social media photographs that had explained my son's sudden radio silence. She raised an eyebrow when I mentioned the jewelry store purchase charged while I lay in the hospital. Predators prefer patterns, she said, jotting down the name Melissa used on Instagram. Your job is to keep breathing and keep records. We can use both. When we left, Chloe slipped her hand into mine, and for the first time since the gurney, I felt something steadier than outrage, the bone-deep relief of being believed. At 2:47 a.m., the next night, sleep abandoned me. I brewed tea, opened my laptop, and followed Patricia's instructions like a lighthouse recipe. I changed passwords, enabled alerts on every account, and walked into the long corridor of itemized proof. The numbers read like a confession without shame. Monthly charges for a yoga studio and a personal trainer, restaurant totals that could have funded a semester of Chloe's after-school clubs, weekend stays at boutique hotels, and the quiet drip of household improvement purchases that had never returned a receipt to my purse. I cross-checked addresses and phone numbers, and each time my son's line appeared, my hands grew steadier. Fraud ends not with a shout, but with a signature on a form you never saw. At 4 a.m., I printed another stack and set it beside Patricia's folders, a small ziggurat of evidence that made sleep unnecessary. The counterattack arrived at 9 a.m. in the form of my sister-in-law Nancy, calling with a tremor of manufactured concern. Word had spread, she said. David insisted I was confused, that grief had unraveled me, that Melissa had done her best to keep me safe. I asked if Nancy remembered who had watered her plants while she and her husband vacationed last summer. She did. I reminded her that on that same week, Melissa had posted photographs from a different beach entirely, with a caption about needing quiet time away from family demands. Silence pooled on the line. Then Nancy exhaled and confessed she had noticed small cruelties the way Melissa intercepted calls intended for me, the way David described me as fragile to strangers while ignoring my messages. I should have said something, she whispered. You're saying it now, I replied, and asked if she would put what she knew in writing. She promised she would. At 11 a.m., Barbara guided me through the pre-listing walkthrough like a field medic guiding a patient through scar inspection. We stepped into the house that had been my compass for 35 years, only to find it scrubbed of my history and dressed for someone else's life. The kitchen island, once a cluttered altar to Tom's cooking adventures, had become a showroom slab. The dining room gleamed with a table I hadn't chosen. Chloe stood in the doorway, tracing the air where her height marks had been painted over. It smells like lemons, she said, but not like home. Barbara photographed every room in crisp, neutral light, while I collected the few things they hadn't hidden or repainted. Tom's old tape, Measure a Ceramic Bird Chloe made in 2nd grade, a jar of sea glass we had gathered one June, before grief learned our address. I left the house with the odd sensation of stepping out of an echo. The next morning at 7:30 a.m., David tried a new tactic. He texted from an unfamiliar number, claiming a misunderstanding, promising to make this right if I would meet him without outsiders meddling. I sent him Patricia's office address and a time noon. He did not appear. At 12:15 p.m., Melissa arrived instead, sunglasses and folded arms, speaking in a tone designed to make witnesses believe she was the reasonable one. She explained that she had curated my public image for my own good, that the social media captions were jokes, that the accounts in my name had been necessary bridges while David's job stabilized. Family is messy, she said, with a smile that did not reach any muscle you can trust. Patricia slid the notarized statements across the table and asked Melissa to read the totals aloud. When Melissa reached $108,000, the number wobbled out of her mouth like a table with a missing leg. You can repay what you took and sign this agreement acknowledging the fraud, Patricia said, or you can litigate and face charges that are already in motion. Melissa asked for time. You had years, I replied, surprised by the evenness of my own voice. Time is for people who tell the truth. By 3 p.m., the detective called with a thread I hadn't expected. Records showed David and Melissa had once lived with his elderly aunt for 2 years. After her death, church attorneys had found irregularities, but no one had the heart to prosecute. Patterns, the detective repeated. Your evidence is breaking a cycle they counted on no one naming. At 5 p.m., Chloe knocked on my bedroom door holding a notebook. She had written a page titled, What We Will Do Next, and beneath it in careful lettering, she had listed things like pack lunches, finish math, and call Grandma's lawyer if Dad shows up uninvited. I pulled her into a hug and felt for the first time in months the forward tilt of a life that could be built without permission from people who confused love with access. The day the emergency custody hearing was set, Patricia called at 8 a.m. with the gravity of a surgeon. The court would hear evidence of abandonment Chloe left with friends during those quiet vacations, and of the financial crimes that had funded a life constructed over my name. We prepared statements until evening, practicing answers to questions designed to trip and tangle. At 9 p.m., after Chloe brushed her teeth and arranged her stuffed rabbit on the pillow, she asked whether telling the truth would make everything worse before it made anything better. I told her that telling the truth is like flipping on a porch light in summer. The moths still come, but at least you can see them land. The custody hearing opened in a courtroom that smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper. Chloe clutched her stuffed rabbit under one arm, allowed as a comfort item by the judge, who looked at her with the kind of measured gentleness professionals reserve for children caught in adult storms. Patricia stood tall beside me, her voice precise, as she laid out the timeline: 3 years of redirected mail, 18 months of fraudulent accounts vacations, billed as quiet family time that excluded the child entirely. She read aloud the charges: identity theft, fraud, forgery, and set each piece of evidence like a stone path across a muddy field. When David tried to speak, his words crumbled under the weight of bank statements and notarized signatures. Melissa dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, claiming misunderstanding, claiming survival, claiming family first. The judge leaned forward and asked Chloe directly if she wanted to return to that house. Chloe shook her head and said quietly, "I don't want to be invisible anymore." The gavel fell like a final sentence. Temporary custody was mine until a permanent arrangement could be decided. In the weeks that followed, the house went on the market. Barbara staged it with neutral furniture, fresh flowers, and a story for potential buyers that skipped the sordid history. Offers arrived within days, a bidding war fueled by the neighborhood's charm. 35 years of memory condensed into $400,000 minus costs, sealed in a cashier's check. Barbara pressed into my hand with quiet triumph. Standing in the empty rooms one last time, I felt a complicated ache, Tom's laughter ghosting in the corners, Chloe's height marks painted over the echo of dinners, both joyful and bitter. "It looks bigger without all their stuff," Chloe said, running her palm across a bare wall. "It looks honest," I answered, which made her smile. But justice was not contained in a real estate closing. Detective Rodriguez called one morning to share what her team had unearthed. On David and Melissa's computer were drafts of conservatorship petitions, complete with staged evidence, transcripts of calls, where I sounded confused photos, where grief had made me disheveled notes from neighbors, manipulated into thinking I was fragile. It was a textbook pattern of financial predators: manufacture incompetence, isolate the victim, seize control. The detective's voice sharpened as she revealed something darker. David and Melissa had researched Tom's medical records, insurance payouts, and estate documents within weeks of his funeral. They had mapped my financial worth before I had finished mourning my husband. My hands trembled as I listened, not with fear this time, but with the weight of knowing I had nearly stepped into the grave they dug for my independence. The trial date for the financial crimes was set 6 months later. In that time, Patricia expanded her investigation, uncovering testimony from Melissa's estranged sister, Jennifer. She revealed a chilling precedent. Years earlier, Melissa had orchestrated something similar with her grandmother Rose, who entered a nursing home with supposed dementia and died with her savings drained. She bragged once that old people are easy marks, Jennifer admitted in her sworn statement, voice breaking. The prosecutor seized on the pattern. This was not an isolated betrayal born of desperation. It was a method. In court, the evidence piled higher than their excuses. Bank statements, forged documents, social media captions juxtaposed with fraudulent charges, testimony from family members who had seen me painted as unstable. David's attorney argued stress and poor judgment. Melissa's attorney claimed she had merely followed her husband's lead. But the paper trail told its own story, and it ended with guilty pleas: David to identity theft, fraud, and elder abuse, in exchange for 2 years in prison and restitution of $127,000. Melissa to 18 months of community service, though Jennifer's testimony left her with a tarnished reputation that no spin could polish. Through it all, Chloe lived with me, adjusting to a new school and a life without manipulation woven into the fabric of daily routines. We ate takeout on the balcony, built a small garden, and adopted a cat that purred against her at night. She began therapy, learning that love doesn't have to come wrapped in lies. I learned it too, sitting in those sessions, realizing how much of myself I had given away in the name of being a good mother. The restitution process was slow, but steady. Luxury items sold, wages garnished, liens placed. I recovered about 60% of what they had taken, but money mattered less than the collapse of their carefully spun story. No one could claim I was incompetent after watching me navigate courts, contracts, and criminal charges with clarity they had never expected. One evening, months later, Chloe hammered a wooden sign above the doorway of the treehouse she had built with a neighbor's grandson. Eleanor and Chloe's clubhouse, it read. Beneath it, she had painted in bright letters, "No drama queens allowed." I laughed until my chest ached, not with palpitations this time, but with a joy I hadn't thought possible. Watching her climb into her little fortress, I understood what had been restored. Not just my finances or my freedom, but the truth that family is not defined by who claims you, but by who stands beside you when the world tilts. And sometimes, the ones calling you dramatic are the architects of the drama themselves. 18 months after the first hospital gurney and the caption that broke my heart, I sat on the deck of a new house in Asheville, North Carolina. Morning light spilled across the mountains, and Chloe's laughter rose from the yard where she was helping my neighbor's grandson nail boards for their treehouse. The air smelled of pine and possibility. The trial was over, the restitution plan in place, and though I had not recovered every dollar, I had recovered something more valuable: peace without apology. David served his sentence in prison, calling occasionally with requests for commissary funds or pleas for intervention in his appeals. Melissa completed her community service, though her name now carried a weight that no yoga class or designer handbag could offset. Their reputations had fractured under the glare of evidence, and the narrative they had crafted of a fragile, confused widow lay in ruins. Truth, it turns out, is heavier than gossip. Chloe's custody became permanent after the court reviewed testimony of her abandonment during those Mexico trips and other quiet weekends. The judge was firm: parents who leave their child behind for luxury vacations while spending stolen money are not fit guardians. Chloe adapted quickly to her new life. She made friends, thrived in school, and began to speak of her parents with a mixture of sadness and resolve that startled me with its maturity. "I hope they learned something," she told me once, tracing a finger down the rough grain of the treehouse ladder. "I hope they learn what family is supposed to be." I told her I hoped the same, though my heart suspected otherwise. The investigation into Aunt Margaret's finances had unearthed nearly $80,000 transferred to David and Melissa before her death. The church reclaimed it, a small measure of justice for a woman who had deserved better. Jennifer, Melissa's sister, sent boxes of old paperwork that prosecutors used to connect dots across years. What began as my personal nightmare had expanded into a pattern recognized by law enforcement as systemic elder abuse. I began volunteering at the Regional Elder Abuse Prevention Center, speaking to other seniors about the warning signs: redirected mail, sudden isolation, unexplained financial activity. Each story I heard carried echoes of my own, and I made a silent vow that I would not let another person be dismissed as dramatic when they were simply being drained of trust and resources. Yet, amid the legal battles and restitution hearings, life found its rhythm again. Chloe and I cooked dinner together in a kitchen no one could take from us. We celebrated birthdays with cakes we baked ourselves and candles that made wishes feel possible. On Christmas morning, instead of cheap clearance gifts, we gave each other laughter, wrapped in the quiet knowledge that we were safe. I learned to drink coffee slowly on my balcony, savoring the small luxuries of freedom: the sound of a child hammering wood, the purr of a cat asleep in a patch of sun, the absence of constant judgment humming in the background. Sometimes people ask if I regret selling the Maple Street house, the place Tom and I built a life inside. The truth is complicated. I regret not protecting it sooner, not recognizing the manipulation as it unfolded. I regret mistaking exploitation for love. But I do not regret closing the door on a prison disguised as a family home. The walls hold memories, yes, but they also held silence, lies, and a plan to erase me. Letting it go was not just about property, it was about reclaiming myself. David still calls from prison, and sometimes I answer short conversations that acknowledge our blood, but not our bond. Trust once shattered by deliberate betrayal does not grow back on command. Chloe rarely speaks to him. She has learned too young that love is not supposed to cost your dignity. When she hammers a new board into her clubhouse or scribbles homework at the kitchen table, I see resilience written into her future. She will not inherit the patterns of manipulation her parents perfected. She will inherit the strength of watching someone fight back and refuse to be silenced. If you are listening to this, let my story be a warning and a promise. Guard your independence fiercely, especially when grief makes you vulnerable. Pay attention to the quiet erasures, missed calls, redirected letters, words spoken about you instead of to you. And remember, being called dramatic is often the last defense of those creating the real drama. What I have now is not perfection, but it is honest. It is peace that doesn't apologize for existing, and that after everything is enough. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story spoke to you, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear it. And I would love to know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what does family mean to you? Your voice matters.